This is Simon Gruber. We're going to talk about wastewater planning and management for small communities, which is pretty much what we have up here in the Rondout Valley. Simon Gruber is an environmental planner, educator, and policy analyst in Orange County, and he knows pretty much everything there is to know about wastewater treatment. He's because of technical difficulties, we can't see him, but we can hear him. And and I'm going to pass you on to Simon right now.
Connection. I love the Rondout Valley. It's beautiful there. And I will say I'm working in the town of Olive on a comprehensive plan and another project that's about to start. So if you want to advance the slide, John.
Sure. Can you see the screen from where you're at?
Oh, yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk about what you're doing with Olive at some point, either now or at the end or during?
I'll briefly mention it now. I have it on the slide, actually, the next slide, if you want to put that up. So yeah, I mentioned it there. It's Smart Growth Comprehensive Plan, named it as such because the grant we're using for the second part, the town paid for the first part a couple of years ago, is from the state, New York State Department of State, and it's a Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning grant for doing master plans for towns. And we got the second round, we got the grant. We didn't get it the first time we applied, but and it's exciting because it requires following that kind of rubric of what smart growth is, which I won't go into, but and it's very exciting to be working in the community. Next slide, please. So, and as I told John, I have a lot of text on many slides. I don't read all of this. You can read it. It's for reference for me, and you'll have the recording later. I pretty much use this as a primer for me, and to some of them I'll go through quickly. I won't be spending a lot of time on the text-only slides in some cases. So the key points, which is the sort of what I'm going to say, is this is about how we maintain a sustainable water quality and quantity, meaning keeping water local, ideally. Bigger sewer systems, and the bigger they get, they do this more. They move water away from local places and usually from where it came from, where it was taken out of the environment, and put it somewhere else farther away downstream. And that has major impacts just by itself. So doing wastewater management on site at the property where the wastewater is being generated and putting it back in the ground with a septic system or other variations that can be larger, but try to keep away from really that bigger centralized model are preferable. And also using soils and vegetation for the treatment stage, like the leach field in a septic system. The soil does a lot of the work in a leach field. And there are larger land-based approaches, and constructed wetlands are really in that category in my mind. And the fourth bullet, this is critical for the reason I'm so interested in this. Typical land use planning does not really include thinking about how we are going to design our wastewater system to support our smart growth scenario or clustered development. From my knowledge, it typically, the wastewater side of things gets added by somebody, almost always an engineer, and it's not used as a tool to support the kind of management, wastewater land use plan that you really want. And that's something that is, you can actually understand these ideas and then pick what you do to drive it. If you want a big city, you need a centralized wastewater system. There's no question. And climate change is just raising the bar on all the reasons to do this, and really many, if not all. Next slide, please.
Okay, and also I just want to mention one other thing here. What's going on here? Why is it not working all of a sudden? Here it is. If you guys have any questions in the middle of the talk, feel free to do that. Simon has said that he'll accept questions in the middle as well, like if you don't understand something. So.
Yeah, right. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but basic groundwater hydrology principles are critical for a lot of this, and just sort of being aware of where the water is in the soil. Next slide, please. And then another one. And again, I won't really go into this, but part of the goal in all of this is, one of the goals is to sort of maintain the existing natural hydrology of an area and not disrupt it. And I'll explain more about that a little later. Next slide. Another slide. And this one I wanted to keep in here. It's a bit redundant, but the sun is in here. And the sun is a key principle for a lot of
Right.
the way the land-based systems, and any system that's using soils and plants, a septic system that has grass over it, that lawn is doing some work to pump water out of the ground when the grass is growing and evaporate it and pull up some nutrients from the soil. Next slide. So this is in here to really show what happens when we alter hydrology in a big way. And this is stormwater management and green infrastructure, which I barely touch on here. Is green infrastructure is a term for natural sort of on-site stormwater management practices. That's now considered to be the approach of choice by EPA and New York State DEC. They have not embraced these ideas, the state has not, for wastewater. But the same principles I'm talking about are wrapped up in green infrastructure for wastewater in a lot of ways. So what this slide is showing is on the left, pre-development or more natural watershed, you have a lot of water soaking into the ground, becoming what's shown here is interflow and base flow in the ground. And very little runoff, the blue arrow, the surface runoff on the left. When you pave over the landscape and create a lot of impervious cover, as we call it, buildings and paving and all, you cut off that recharge to the soil and you get a lot more surface runoff. Next slide, please. This is another way of looking at some of the effects of this. This is over time. Say over 24 or 48 hours during a rainstorm, or before, during, and after. On the left, in a more natural watershed, which is the solid line, you have more water naturally in the ground, which is the base flow that's there from the beginning, because it's been recharged more. Then when the storm hits, some of it gets into the soil and you get more groundwater building up over time, but it's slower and it doesn't get to as high a peak. The dotted line, you're showing how you've got a paved landscape. You're depriving the groundwater of recharge. Your stream is going to go up much more quickly, your smaller streams during the rainstorm, which leads to flooding and erosion. And with the bigger storms we're getting, this is exacerbated. And then it drops off more, and you have the dotted line after the peak, lower base flow again, less groundwater left over, so to speak. Next slide. And in places that are getting more developed with more properties built on and all, and most of the Rondout Valley is not like this, I'm sure, but the stormwater issues and the wastewater both can have impacts on these. That's why I've got this all in here. So the goals we're really aiming for: sustainability, groundwater recharge, removing nutrients from wastewater is important. maintaining the hydrology I mentioned, energy conservation in terms of the treatment systems and sewer systems that move water can use a lot of energy if they have pumping in them, pump stations, and then using this, all of this to support your land use goals. Next slide. So this is just a number of bigger picture policy. This is actually dated at this point, but most of it's still relevant. Next slide, please. Okay, again, if you listen to look at the history of sewers. London built, they built sewers and put their wastewater all in the Thames. This is the classic example. But they didn't run it away from the city, and it caused a huge stink. And they realized we got to get this away from here. So they built a big sewer system to move it farther downstream, and that solved their local problem. The sewer paradigm that developed in Europe and here was built to move wastewater away for sanitary reasons, health reasons, to keep it out of drinking water, and also get rid of smells and things, but it didn't think about what are we doing to the environment and our local environment, for that matter, with groundwater and all that. Gradually, people realized we're polluting our water, it stinks, and we have to actually treat it before we dump it into the river. So treatment plants became, a technology being developed over time. And we now have water quality standards for wastewater treatment that are in many cases very high. And we also still have this paradigm of moving the water away. So you're doing all that work to treat the water to a very high standard, and you're also spending a lot of money to build pipes to run it a long distance and not recharging your groundwater. And so it's a broken paradigm. Next slide, please. So the sustainable approach is more to think about what you can do locally. How do you address all of these issues from the start before you invest in big sewer systems? Once you do, you're kind of in trouble. Recycling the nutrients, I haven't added this before, I mentioned this. You can use treated wastewater effluent, the treated water, to irrigate landscaping. You can irrigate trees and grow trees and use it as nutrients that make the trees grow faster. It's not advised or legal to grow many food crops, but down south they grow some crops with treated effluent, citrus and maybe melons, things that have thick rinds and all. So the pathogens are not going to get into the food part. And then I'm mentioning life cycle cost analysis, energy inputs, and other things. And the other issue with bigger systems is the standard model, and this is getting a lot more attention now with environmental justice. You put a big treatment plant down typically by a river because you want to build the sewer system so it runs by gravity downhill as much as possible. Over history, the people who end up living near those places, or were living there in the first place often, are often not the rich people. And over time, you're concentrating impacts on people like smells and health risks and other things in places where people live who can't afford and don't have political power to deal with this. Doing it locally keeps it local in the community. If it's smelly, if it's in Rosendale or it's in a smaller community, the people who live there are going to smell it and say, we got to fix this. And it also keeps things local for other reasons I mentioned. Next slide, please. So again, the big pipe is a term people coined that I like, that is a term for capturing this paradigm of the conventional approach, which is still, frankly, the preferred approach of the regulators, the engineers. The engineering community is a huge barrier to changing this. And you can't use land-based systems, the third bullet here. It becomes less and less practical to do things like a constructed wetland or spray irrigation on fields or forests with treated effluent. Large ponds, aerated lagoons are a great way to treat wastewater. And it can be a very attractive thing to look at in the landscape. It's a pond, and ducks will be on it, and you can't do that if you're concentrating all your wastewater in a big sewer, and you have 10 or 20 million gallons, or even 1 million gallons a day. It would be very hard. So next slide, please. And yeah, I'm kind of repeating a lot of stuff I said. Another on the right side here, that an interesting set of features about doing it in smaller systems, even if you expect your area to grow more over time. But if you build a big sewer system, even the scale of, say, one of the bigger communities that might be developing up there, and you do the classic approach that took hold in the 50s, 60s, 70s, I guess, in this country, is you plan for what you might need over 20 years. So, okay, in 15 years, we're going to have even more growth, and we have to have the sewer plant size for that, and we have to size the sewers. So you're investing all that money for capacity that's not going to be used for 10 years or more. And then that ends up driving the local politicians see, okay, I've got a high new cost that we have to pay every year, and the people who are paying these rates are going to pay a lot of money. But if I get more development in here and use that sewer capacity up, we'll lower those rates. So let's attract some development to use all this capacity I just built. And that's a pattern that has happened. And if you do it the opposite way, you can use the technologies available to do what you need in smaller increments and build systems that serve smaller areas over time and save money and tailor this more to what's really going to happen or is happening. And the other point near the bottom is the sewer system itself is an enormous part of the cost of these bigger systems that got built all over the place in this country in the 70s and 80s with federal money. And after, we're at the lifetime of many of those or past it, and then you have to start replacing those pipes. It's a lot of money. And what do you get for it is my point. You're doing all these things to your watershed. Next step, next slide. Centralized sewer system drain water away. And I mentioned here in the second slide something I didn't mention about how it does it, because you're taking water out of the ground deliberately for drinking water and putting it into your sewer in the first place. Sewer systems also let water in through manholes, infiltration and inflow, or leaky pipes underground that are cracked. And the other thing that I don't hear discussed by others much is they do act like a French drain. In other words, you've got a pipe along a buried trench with gravel at the bottom running downhill. So you're building essentially a drain for your shallow groundwater. And if you have wetlands near that or small streams, your whole groundwater table is liable to be lowered, even if there's no leaks in that pipe to let water in. Finally, this is the problem that's also not discussed so much, is these cracked old pipes leak wastewater out, and that wastewater has not been treated. So that's getting into the ground. And you can't see it. Next slide. So this is a graphic showing the decentralized concept where you have in different parts of the community, you have one bigger community system leading to a sewage treatment plant, STP, close to the river. But you also have other areas served. Each dot would be an individual home with an on-site system. And you can have small systems up on the left that serve a handful of homes. A clustered system, they're sometimes called. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's the same. Oh, there's a missing. Oh, yeah, I see. It has an animation. I didn't see that. Next slide, please. So the nutrients. How many people here are aware of harmful algal blooms as an issue? Okay, yeah, some, and maybe others who aren't on camera. It's become a much bigger issue. The Wallkill River watershed was designated not long ago as impaired officially by DEC, meaning it's not meeting its water quality standard. And the TMDL I list, that's a acronym for a plan for how to fix that that's being developed. I'm pretty sure my friends in the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance were partly responsible for driving the DEC decision to do that. That's the watershed group for that watershed. And so nitrogen is the more abundant nutrient. It tends not to be the main problem in freshwater bodies. There may be exceptions, it's complicated, but all three nutrients, which are familiar to any knowledgeable gardener, are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that feed plants. Those are the things plants need a lot of. And in freshwater bodies, typically it's phosphorus that's the one that makes a big difference to water quality when you get a little bit more of it going in. And that's the key thing that is now really one of the concerns for the harmful algal blooms. And so, yeah, I pretty much covered everything here. And nutrient removal is a priority for protecting groundwater and surface water. And you can choose your technologies and approaches for these things to, try to optimize doing that, depending on where you are and many other factors. Next slide. Okay, this is a graphic just quickly to show a sort of standard on-site system. On the left is the side view showing the home. And actually, it's kind of useful. You can see it's showing separation distances. I don't have a good slide really detailing that, but the required distance from the house, between the well and the septic really is the key thing, according to the health code for on-site systems. And then the soil absorption system, typically called a leach field. The septic tank in between is the settling basin. Essentially, that's what a septic tank does. It lets the water settle and the solids settle out. And if it's running right and designed right, the water that flows out into the leach field on the right side of the slide is relatively, free of those bigger solids. And then the soil does all the work from there, including absorbing nutrients and providing the matrix for bacteria to grow, essentially. Those are some of the main things. And there's, soil absorption of phosphorus is a key thing that removes phosphorus. The right side of this slide shows a cutaway of a septic tank. And if you want, we could come back to this. I could talk a little bit more about what happens inside the tank and why it's important, but we'll move on for now. Next slide. Oh, I didn't see these parts when I put this slide together. Okay, to move up the ladder, so to speak, if you want to do more advanced treatment in an on-site or a small community system, small community meaning you might have 3 or 5 houses or more connected through a small sewer system to one treatment site. I just focused on one brand called the Advantex is the product, Arenco is the maker, that was being widely used even 15 years ago. And these are manufactured systems designed to provide more advanced treatment, so they take out some of the nutrients, particularly more than a standard on-site septic system. And they still put the water out, usually, almost always, to a leach field or some kind of ground-based discharge. And there are other brands, other makers. Next slide, please.
If I can interrupt for a second, what's the advantage of this Advantex system?
Well, the advantage of using a treatment technology that goes beyond a standard septic tank, essentially, because in a standard system, all you've got is a tank, and then it goes out to the leach field or absorption field, is that you're doing a lot more treatment before you put the water into the soil. So your net result when the water gets into the ground, or in some places they may be using Advantexes to discharge to a surface water body like a stream, which is harder from a regulatory point of view. But you're doing a lot more to keep water clean. That's the advantage, and a cost. There is a cost, and it takes more maintenance to make sure these are working right. But I say more maintenance. On-site system, a standard septic system needs maintenance. That doesn't mean they get it. But I'll talk about that a little later. And
Okay.
I would say, John, you had another question?
Yeah, I just curious. So this stays above ground, this box here?
No. Actually, I think the next slide might show it more. On the left of this slide, the little picture at the bottom, you can see that is a picture of the box itself, which is the main treatment unit, in a hole where it's going to be covered up. What you'll see when this hole on the bottom center is covered is you'll still see these tops, because these systems are designed to be accessible and maintainable. But the rest of it would be, under the soil.
Okay, so the advantage then there's no leach field then. This is sort of the leach field.
There's a leach field. I'm not positive what we see in that photo, but typically the Advantex system and others drain, and I'm sure this one almost certainly drains the soil. What I just don't know is it's possible this hole itself is the infiltration area or part of it.
Yeah.
But this is going to a leach field. You still need a place to put the water.
Yeah.
And the soil-based discharge is the more protective way to do it, protective human health. And, the health department, the sanitation people, and the really conventional engineering health paradigm is get that water away from people where they can't touch it. So if it's underground, more than 2 feet, a standard leach field, the leaching lines are 2 feet down, and that water is trickling down through the soil the way it should be. People can't touch that water, can't be exposed to the microbes in it.
Okay.
And that's the first goal of all this, really.
So it sounds like, I don't want to dwell on this, but it looks to me like this is like a super duper septic tank, like much more efficient. It cleans out maybe more of it than a regular traditional septic tank.
Yeah, the way they work, I'll mention it now. I essentially started a project that became a big planning and demonstration project in southern Orange County in Greenwood Lake with money from the EPA and NYSERDA, the Energy State Agency. And in that project, and that was driven partly by the lake having too much phosphorus in it. And they actually enacted many years ago in the village of Greenwood Lake a law a local law that requires property owners to inspect their septic tanks every 3 years, have them inspected by a qualified person, and if necessary, pump out the tank. Septic tanks need to be pumped periodically. 3 years, to pump every 3 years may be too much, more than you need for many homes, depending on how many people live there and other things, but it's protective and you need to do that to make, otherwise if you don't, your system will get ruined and you'll be polluting the water. But the way they work, this system, it has hanging textile fabric, like curtains, and the water sprayed onto those surfaces. And those surfaces provide a lot of surface area for microbes to grow. And that's where the work happens. The processes I mentioned with the biology. So next up. Okay, yeah, just more. And you can see this one shows a bit more clearly that it's a schematic showing the system is going to be underground. And next slide, please. I don't want to spend too much time on this because there's more to, and I just happened to find this in older slides. I forgot all about this. There's actually a law in the books actively promoting the use of reclaimed wastewater for irrigation. I don't know whatever happened with that, but nice to have if you need it. Next slide. So now this is just going to be a series of slides. Again, I don't want to dwell on some of them too much because they're copied from an EPA slide set that's years old. But this is relevant for the kinds of approaches that communities in the Rondout Valley area can use going forward in an incremental way that build on what's in place already and could create a more robust management approach that has the community, the municipality playing an active role to some extent. And there are various options for how much role. EPA created this framework. They rolled it out around here. There was a forum down at Bear Mountain that I helped plan a little bit, and they did one in every region of the country, in every EPA region, about this approach, which was essentially encouraging where you're not going to put in sewers, bigger sewers. Your options for a community, a municipality to, or could be another organization, to enact a program to put in place steps to try to get better management of small systems. And essentially it's voluntary. They spelled out 5 levels for what they called responsible management entities, meaning, I guess in the case of a municipality that's taking actual responsibility at some level for managing systems. And then the 5 tiers of the third item there basically run from, at the lowest level, you can just have an ongoing education program to encourage owners of properties and residents to manage their systems properly, get them maintained, get them inspected. The next step, well, they're in each step is in another series of slides coming, but it goes on up. The highest level approach is the municipality actually owns on-site systems and or has an easement on the property to access it, does the maintenance themselves with staff, for example, or a contractor. And Woodstock, notably, is the place around here that has something very interesting in place going way, way back. I learned about it a long time ago, and then I learned more maybe 5-7 years ago in a call with someone. Basically, there are some parts of Woodstock served by a bigger community system and some parts served by on-site systems that the municipality actually has direct control over, in the sense that they have some kind of legal agreement to maintain them regularly. And I don't know if they actually own the hardware on the property, so to speak. These are private lots they're on. And the really exciting thing I learned more recently about this was that the community, when they were faced with the option to get a lot of federal money to build one system that would sewer every, bigger area, they looked at that idea and they said, wait a second, that means we're going to take your money from the federal government and end up with a lot of sewer capacity that we don't need yet. And that's going to attract more growth. And no, we don't want that. And they actually pushed back. And I imagine at that time, it might have been hard because, again, engineers and the EPA people they were dealing with might have been like, well, why don't you take this money? But this is what happened. And so, for what it's worth, one of the people I learned a lot about this once a long time ago was John Laval in Woodstock, who's, I believe, the father of Amanda Laval, who's now the deputy, one of the deputy county executives there. And he was involved in it, I guess, or knew about it from being involved at the town level a long time ago. Next slide. Oh, and I'm at time right here. So yeah, let's go through these quickly, John. Just kind of show one. So this is the overview of this management framework I just outlined. Next slide. And so we'll just go through these quickly. These are the different levels. The top at the top is the title they give it, maintenance awareness. Find out where they are if you want to take that kind of step. Next step. There, you can use a maintenance contract. An individual homeowner can do this, or the municipality can. You can actually have a permit system so that whoever owns the system has a legal permit that's written, that says you have to do this for this system. Next slide. Next slide. And then this doesn't completely match what I said earlier about 5 levels, but well, here you have, they're calling it a utility. That would mean, in what I said before, the municipality actually having their own staff. Yeah, well, this is the highest level. They take ownership of it. So this is an approach EPA put out there to show municipalities, particularly, you have a lot of options. It would be a good idea to do something about this, because right now, nobody's doing anything, really. The state health department in New York, the county health departments, typically, they only really, from what I know in most places, they only really go out and look at systems if there's an abject failure, like raw effluent running on the ground. It's up to homeowners and other people to maintain their on-site systems. Nobody's watching over their shoulder. Go back one slide, John. I just want to, I've covered a lot of the ideas in here, really probably all of them, but these are some slides that have some nice graphics that you can maybe want to come back at. The bottom right, in fact, is a particularly nice one because it gives you a better sense, in a graphic sense, maybe, of the different sizes of system and approach for more. It's not great, but the terms mentioned here, individual septic, on-site, cluster system, are some of the different ways to think about this and what to call them. Next slide. John? Yeah. You could scroll. This I want to mention quickly. This is another benefit of sticking to the small scale approach that I'm advocating. I thought about this, and I had thought about these things, all of these ideas a lot by this point, and I heard that the Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the top think tanks on energy issues in this country, was doing a report on decentralized wastewater management. And I wrote a contact person there an email asking a question. And 2 years later, when they published their big report, they published my email and an answer saying this makes sense. And this is one of the many, many items, 9.3, support of local economies, as a benefit that they called out in this. This is the best report I know about to this day. It's 20 years old now, but that really goes into a lot of detail, explaining a lot of the benefits and also the problems and impacts I mentioned. And it's not biased because they're honest about talking about the downsides of decentralized systems too. Next slide, please.
It's nice that they gave you a little shout out there, but they could have.
Well, they didn't ask me to use my email, and they didn't tell me, but yeah, I was flattered. I should dwell on it a little bit more. The point is that I haven't explained it. It's key to explain this. If you build a centralized sewer system, I thought this through. You're borrowing a lot of money if you're a municipality through bonding, which is the way they do it. And then you pay that money off over 20 years or more. And you do it using the ratepayer money I mentioned that is being collected every year for people using the system. That money is going to people who bought those bonds as capital repayment and interest payments. Those people are all over the place. Very few of them are likely to be in the community that's building the system. Then, once you've got the system, a bigger system tends to use a lot more electricity, a lot more power. Where do the cost of power go when you pay your electric bill? It doesn't stay in the community. So I realized there's a lot of money flowing out when you're paying off your system and operating it that basically is getting taken from local ratepayers and going out. And then I thought, well, if these small systems, they're more labor intensive, maybe on average per gallon treated. And, there are issues there, but that money is somebody who works locally. They're working in the community. They live nearby. That money stays in the community. So that's what I thought of through, and I wrote it out. The email I sent them is like 2 paragraphs. It's in this book. And this is what I got. So, and after they said I summarized it, they have a set of information. It's about a 2-page piece. I can send a link. I should prepare a set of links for all of you to have for more information. That report is available for free on the web. So this is the recap. So we're near the end. I pretty much said all of this already, and don't need to repeat it. This is sort of the closing. Jonas Salk, who was developed one of the polio vaccines that were developed to fight polio. I heard this on the radio. He was in an interview. And this is the paradigm shift dynamic that people say, no, that can't be true. And eventually they just say, well, of course, and a lot of other people said things like this in different forms. But next slide. So we're very near the end. This is a golf course that is being irrigated with treated wastewater somewhere. I don't know where I got this. And it can be done. There are places around that do use And the wastewater in this case, to be clear, would be disinfected as the final treatment stage. Next slide.
There's the guy who's desperate to play golf that day.
Yeah, I don't, honestly, the idea of spraying while someone's out there, and you don't spray every day, to be clear, because if you did that, the ground would get wet. You have to apply water in tandem with what the grass and the plants can take up. And you have to manage it, but it's doable. Finally, I just want to show, this is actually a sort of tree farm where they were using treated wastewater for irrigation. And the point of this is partly that we can combine various uses of open space. They can be beautiful areas. They can even be recreation areas, and also be places where we produce trees, and also places where we can manage our water. And that's an interesting way to think of it. So thank you for listening. And longer than I planned, but much longer. So I'm available to
Kind of questions.
Hi.
I have one. Let's see, you were talking about the kind of the history of, okay, Todd, and after I ask my question, I get the answer. Was England the first official wastewater management system? You mentioned them as being kind of the first. Do you know of any what they did before that and what year that was?
Well, I mentioned London. I mentioned it because it's notorious in this topic. No. Rome, famously, Rome had sewers, and I don't know. I doubt they were doing much, if anything, to treat the water. So they were just probably moving wastewater, raw wastewater, somewhere where, away from where most people lived. But there's a long history of how people have managed wastewater and water, for that matter. It's quite fascinating. And I didn't really get into it at all, but I just read again recently that until sewers were developed in many cities, cities weren't so big back then, but a lot of human waste went into pits in the ground. And I have some books that talk about, in New York City, even into the early 20th century, there were still people making a living carting basically, human waste that would have been more like a solid form out to Brooklyn and Queens to farms where it was used on the land to fertilize the farms. That was part of the city economy, and Brooklyn wasn't part of New York City until 1898. But and the Chinese, it's famous. They did a lot for hundreds, probably thousands of years of managing their human waste very carefully. It was a resource. They'd collect it and use it. It was a precious thing because they knew we have to put this back. If you keep growing food, and this is what we're doing, we're growing food in this country with nitrogen fertilizer that's made from natural gas as the principal input, as well as energy used to make it. And then the phosphorus is coming from rock phosphate that's being mined. And there's a concept people coined years ago called peak phosphorus. That phosphorus source is not unlimited. And we're taking those nutrients, growing food, our waste that comes from the food goes out, is extracted from wastewater at great cost in big treatment plants in many places, taken away as a waste product, because the nutrients aren't recycled from most of these at all. And then we use more new fertilizers to grow food. That's not a circular system. And we got to learn somehow how to turn it around and basically have the nutrients we're using that we excrete go back into agriculture. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable.
Todd, you had a question, or Ann? Unmute yourself.
I have a question. I have a question about, so we have, our little, septic tank, and we were told by a guy that came to come and treat it, that we don't have to use that. You know, they sell this stuff in hardware stores that, you know, you're supposed to throw it in your toilet every month. And it's
Right.
supposed to, right?
Yeah.
And this guy told us, no, don't use that stuff. Just, you know, if you drink beer, that's enough. So I don't know if you know anything, you know, the answer to that question.
Oh, yeah.
I do not.
Yeah, what I know is that those, you know, there's been a lot of people who have been selling various products. There's also actually systems that have been developed, at least one I know of, to add on to a conventional septic system that is designed, is intended to improve its performance. And the standard line, the last time I checked from the health department and others, was no, you don't need these, and they don't necessarily do anything. I heard, you know, people think also, you throw some ground meat in there once in a while or whatever, but no, you don't need it. You don't need it. If you put a septic system in and you start using it, you're going to have trillions of bacteria in that tank of all kinds, and they're doing the work. And maintaining the system properly, and designing it and siting it properly in the first place, in the right kind of soils and all, and then maintaining it are the keys. I think you could retrofit a conventional system to perform better, but I don't know if I don't think those additives are worth using at all, as far as I know.
Alan, you have a question? You have a hand up?
Yeah, I was interested in the decentralized wastewater treatment plants. And I wonder how the economics of that work and the structuring of it. I mean, do you need the drawings that you showed sort of a modern development, rather than sort of the way a lot of the Hudson Valley is laid out with, people on multiple acreage land. And I'm just curious, is this something you can retrofit? Is this something that requires a certain density, closer to what you'd see in a city? And what are the economics of it?
Well, I mean, for example, the Advantex brand system that I showed, you could certainly take out a conventional septic system. I mean, take out your septic tank and put one of those in, and then presumably continue using your existing leach field. As far as the economics of doing that, it would cost.
I'm talking about linking up multiple homes.
Okay, for multiple homes, there are various ways to treat wastewater from, say you were talking a cluster of 5 homes, or it could be 50 or 100. There's a whole range of different ways. And when you get up to a bigger size like that, you're probably going to be into a realm where you may have an engineer be designing what is essentially a small wastewater treatment plant. The example actually we featured at the Rondout Municipal Center, we had Doug Clark there, great guy, an engineer who then moved to Colorado, so I lost one of my good speakers, but he worked with the town of Hillsdale years ago and his wife, Ann Clark, is also an engineer, and they were working together. And they had a problem where they had a very small community. They had some existing homes and buildings that were under the health department order. You can't increase the occupancy here. You can't open a new business. You don't have adequate wastewater systems for these buildings. So they took them a long time, but they cobbled together money, and they designed a system that includes a collection system serving, I believe, about 70 properties. So they put in a new sewer system, but they didn't use bigger sewers. Small diameter sewers, small diameter collection systems are pipes that are smaller, narrower. They're cheaper and easier to put in. They're typically pressurized, so you don't have to run everything by gravity, so you can go up and down underground over rock and other things. And for a short distance, relatively, because you're dealing with a cluster of properties that are, close together, this can make sense. And then I don't remember what kind of treatment system they designed, but they put in something simple that would be appropriate. And I probably have more information. I know I have more information on that system if you want that case study, but it solved their problem. But to get to one of those questions you're really asking, the economics of this really do depend. You can't do something like that unless the buildings are fairly close together. You wouldn't run sewer lines of any kind to connect properties and homes, buildings that are, a quarter of a mile apart, or even 200. Even at some point, larger lot sizes, if we're talking residential development, mean it becomes increasingly just totally infeasible to put in a sewer system of any kind. And so every lot has to be served separately. So it's very much a custom kind of thinking about, going in this direction. And part of the whole message is don't just fall into the box of thinking, well, a bunch of properties, build a sewer system. Because you might, in a situation like Hillsdale, have a property or some properties that are a little further outside the center of the community, farther away, and that would mean typically they might have more soil, they might have more room. They're not as close to other wells. So maybe you can make the on-site system approach work there. And if you can't do it with the existing septic system, you could potentially say, well, for that set of 5 homes, instead of connecting them to the small sewer, we'll put in the Advantex systems, or what is needed, what the appropriate technology, so to speak.
Any other questions? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, this may be, this is a little bit off the topic, but I just wondered, is there ever come up with any kind of alternative to asphalt? Something that's a little more like landscape cloth?
Alternative to asphalt?
Yeah.
Well,
Asphalt,
they have
is-
it
I mean,
permeable.
we ride our cars on it, but, that's why we have all this problem with runoff, right?
Okay, no. Now you're into pervious paving or porous paving products
I'm
systems.
just curious.
Yeah, well, that's one of the. I mentioned green infrastructure briefly earlier. That's one of the approaches or practices that are part of the green infrastructure pantheon. As far as literally alternatives to asphalt, I mean, essentially, if you really want a paving material, concrete is used for some very big roads, but and I've seen a product that and this is more for like a sidewalk or something. It wouldn't be for a road. It wouldn't work for a road because they're actually kind of rubbery. They're instead of asphalt, it's like, I think, recycled tire chips maybe. with some kind of binder that is porous, but that's not the best way or cheapest way to do porous surfaces or paving in most cases. If you're really interested, at the New York State Parks Regional Office in Statsburg, we've done a few workshops there. They renovated an old school, and they did it to get to the LEED certification, LEED Gold maybe, which is a green building certification. And they did a variety of things in the building itself, but they also did outside in the parking area. There's porous concrete, there's porous asphalt, and there are porous paving bricks, which look like pavers, but they're versions that have cracks. They're designed to maintain spaces between the bricks to let water flow through. And so it's a really cool place to go and see 3 different kinds of porous paving systems at one site. I wonder how those are holding up.
Well, this is good to know, yeah.
They were happy with most of it after it had been in for a while. It was working pretty well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks a lot, Simon. Great presentation. Make sure everybody checks out next week or next month the green burials. Check that out. And thanks. Have a great night, everybody.
Nice.